when I'm tasked with these things, and I'm like, all right, I'm going to take a shot at it. Pierre Dorion is taking a lot of flack, which is fine. It's part of the job being a GM. Mark Bergevin went from GOAT to awesome back to GOAT, just based on Carey Price's play. And there are moves that have been made by Pierre Dorion that leaves you scratching your head. But this is an ongoing problem for Ottawa that started before he got there. Brian Murray honestly made some baffling moves before Dorion took over. And since then, Dorion's been piling on. And I'll get into that as we go along. Now, these are trades going from... Well, it's just going in whatever order. I think these are... No, it's from the oldest to the newest. The first deal he made, he traded first-round picks. He really wanted Logan Brown. The draft pick he traded was Michael McLeod. And then he threw in a third-round draft pick to New Jersey. So, in that deal, to me, I was baffled at the time, and I'm baffled now. Do you throw in a third-round pick? And when you look at the difference between Brown and McLeod, and this is something I'll ask Ottawa fans, do you look at Logan Brown and say he's definitely going to be the better player than Michael McLeod? Because right now, to me, it's kind of a toss-up, personally. He picks up Patrick Seeloff for Alex Chason. That's kind of a saw-off. I mean, Calgary fans couldn't be happier to get rid of Chason when he left. This is where it got bad. Now, this was when my channel started picking up steam. There's still a video on about this trade. So I was completely down on this trade from day one. Brassard and a 7th in this coming draft. And Ottawa gave up Mika Zibanejad and a 2nd in this upcoming draft. This is why Ottawa doesn't have a 2nd-round draft pick in this upcoming draft. To shore up what they have, because they threw in the 2nd to get them to take the younger, better forward in Mika Zibanejad than Derek Brassard. Now, at the time, there was some debate about whether or not Brassard was the better guy now, and then Mika would be better later. Well, it's about a year and a half later, and Mika is the better player. Now, he's concussed. He's out for the Rangers at the time I'm doing this, but Mika Zibanejad has shown that he is the better player right now. And throwing in a 2nd while taking back a 7th is just bewildering to me. Remember, this is an Ottawa team that right now is near the bottom of the league. That's going to be a pretty good draft pick. That's going to be a guy who either fell out of the first round and could make the NHL within a year or two, or is going to be a guy that they may have scouted and thought, well, he's underrated, and they may not pick him other than they've got an extra 2nd-round draft pick. And it also gives the Rangers some flexibility if they decide to add something with that draft pick. And I didn't trace whether that draft pick's been moved since then. The fact that the Rangers had a 2nd-round draft pick or have a 2nd-round draft pick from Ottawa is stunning in that deal. Mike Condon comes over from Pittsburgh for a 5th-round draft pick. That's okay. He's still the backup. I'm not going to say anything bad about that. Tommy Wingles came over from San Jose for Stortini, Buddy Robinson, and a 7th-round draft pick. No losses there. They got Mark Hagel for futures from Minnesota. Future considerations usually equal nothing. There's usually nothing for future considerations. They picked up Burrows from Vancouver. And the bewildering part of this one is that they gave up Jonathan Dahlen, who's not a top-level prospect, but the fact they gave up a prospect for a very rapidly declining Burrows is troubling. I understood it at the time, and I defended it somewhat at the time. I can't defend it now. I can't. Victor Stahlberg for a 3rd-rounder from Carolina. Stahlberg's currently playing for a team in Switzerland. So I'm going to go ahead and guess that that 3rd-round draft pick, regardless of who it is, you're giving up draft picks. Don't give up draft picks. Now, in this one, they got Jyrki Jokipaka, one of my favorite names ever, guys out of the NHL. It's sad. And a 2nd-round draft pick from Calgary for Curtis Lazar and Mike Koska. Lazar will never reach the ceiling he was supposed to, but Jokipaka is gone. That 2nd-round draft pick, the jury's still out on that. So I'm willing to give Dorion at least a passing grade on this one. But there's troubling issues for the rest of it. Because there are major issues, and we'll get to that. And then there's the big deal. This is the big trade. Ottawa gets Duchesne. What Ottawa gave up to get Duchesne. Shane Bowers, Andrew Hammond, a 1st-round draft pick, which is lottery protected, and a third-round draft pick. So they don't have a second. They don't have a first if they make the playoffs. And if they don't, they have it, but then they lose next year's first. And they don't have a third-rounder. This is troubling. Because think about it. For an Ottawa fan, you could go into this year's draft and say, awesome, we got this first-round draft pick at number, say, 8 or number 6. We don't have one next year. Oh, and we don't have a second or third-round draft pick this year either. This kid had better be good. And he likely will be. This year's draft is supposed to be a very good, deep draft. But it's going to take time. Now, in terms of free agents, who was added in the offseasons? Tom Pyatt and Chris Kelly in 2016. Pyatt's still there. 2017, Nate Thompson and Johnny Oduya. I haven't heard any complaints about Thompson. I have complaints personally about Oduya as a Dallas fan and having seen him in Dallas. And then they lost Methot in the expansion draft to Vegas. It looked like they had a plan to potentially get him back, and that fell through, and Methot ended up in Dallas. And so they have a depleted blue line with that. And there aren't any deals in any of this here that really help their blue line. The funny part is, the collapse that we're looking at is really a matter of this should have happened a while ago, but there's been a lot of players on this team who've overachieved and kept things afloat, even though they shouldn't have been. When they traded Jason Spezza, what did they get back? They got back Chason, who's in Washington. They got back Guptill. I'm going to guess the way you pronounce that. He's in the East Coast League right now. And Nick Paul, who has played 4 games this year for Ottawa. And they also got a second rounder back in 2015. But don't worry, they traded that to New Jersey. And New Jersey drafted Mackenzie Blackwood, a solid-looking goaltender. Part of the reason why Wedgwood became expendable for the Devils. Bewildering. And then this trade is the one that I think is unforgivable. Nick Foligno to Columbus for Mark Methot. I love Methot, but Nick Foligno has been missed since this team moved him. Nick Foligno was a revelation when he got to Columbus. Has been fantastic for Columbus since then. Ben Bishop. Craig Anderson was the starter, so they traded Bishop. All warm and fuzzy feelings aside, they should have kept Bishop and they should have moved Anderson. That's what they should have done. They should have found a way to make it happen. Bishop was moved to Tampa for Conacher and a 4th-round draft pick, which I would imagine they traded. And then you look at contracts, they've got Bobby Ryan with this insane contract that was signed in 15-16. Zach Smith is on an expensive contract that was signed this past summer, so that one is on Pierre Dorion. Dion Phaneuf had a crazy contract when he came over from Toronto, very expensive, and Craig Anderson has an expensive contract. $4.2 million for what he's doing now, for what he's worth now, is a lot. And that's part of the thing when you sign a guy that's in his 30s already, even goaltenders when they're 32, 33, and you sign them, towards the end of that contract, it's probably going to be a lot of money for diminishing returns. It's a roster that there hasn't been anything brought in terms of a veteran leader. I think that's what they were looking for with Matt Duchene. I think they figured Matt Duchene's played a lot of games for his age, and he's played international hockey, and this is a kid that wants to go to the playoffs, and he wants to play to win, but Duchene's always played well with star players. He plays well at World Championships. He plays well in any kind of a World Cup atmosphere. Any kind of atmosphere where it's an all-star tournament. You stick Duchene in there and he looks great. You put him with a team of guys who aren't star players, and it shows pretty quickly that he's not at that level. He's not the guy who brings the guys to the next level. He's not the Sidney Crosby. He's the Crosby winger. And I know he plays center. I'm just making that as a point. He's the guy who gets, like Sherry in Pittsburgh. Sherry would not be a 30-goal scoring forward without Crosby. Crosby absolutely aids this kid. Duchene is a star player when he plays with stars. He's capable of being good. Remember, in Colorado, he had some very good young forwards to play with. And the results were, over the last season and a bit, middling. His totals last year were brutal. And I think part of the problem with Duchene, and we do this, A guy will have a really solid career. He'll have a really bad year, and automatically people say, well, just that's a write-off. He won't do that again. Well, why not? There are players that all of a sudden hit a wall in their career, and they're done. They're done as top line players. And it happens. It doesn't matter about age. It doesn't matter about experience. Injuries don't matter. The guy could be completely healthy. And if he hits that wall and he's done, then it's over. Ottawa's been shut out at the time I'm recording this 3 of their last 4 games. There's no offensive player brought in to offset some of the losses they've had over the years. Alfredson left as a free agent. Alfredson was never replaced. There was never a replacement for Spezza. Stone is a great forward. Like, I'm not saying anything bad about Stone. I'm just saying that in terms of what Ottawa needs going forward, if Mark Stone is your number one guy, then your forwards are probably going to be a problem. Mark Stone is a 3 guy in Pittsburgh, maybe a 4, and that's your championship team. That's what you're aspiring to be. And I don't see moves for Ottawa that bring them up to that level. And I see contracts that are overvalued. You know, Bobby Ryan being kept in 15-16 because they didn't want to lose everybody. And I've said that before. But it's a slippery slope, because once you start trading out prospects and draft picks, you're saying we're going to win now. And then the next season, after you declared you're going to win now, you don't have that future. Right now, Ottawa doesn't have a lot of futures to trade unless you trade a Logan Brown, unless you trade a Colin White, unless you trade a Thomas Chabot. And nobody wants to trade those guys. And yet, if a team's phoning Ottawa and they're like, well, if you think you can win now, that's what we want. We want one of those 3. And I really don't know that this is necessarily Dorion's fault. But he's been in charge of this roster for about a year and a half. Well, yeah, April of 2016 he took over. So he took over after the trade deadline. You know, you look from trade deadline on. So to me, it's a year and a half he's been in charge of this roster. And in his time, he has decided, we're going to win now. We're going to trade out the future to get an Alex Burrows. We're going to trade out the future to get a Derek Brassard. And in return, he's lost to Jonathan Dahlen, who could very well be a decent bottom 6 NHLer at some point. I don't see the ceiling with him that other people do. I know Canuck fans are all excited about Pettersson and Dahlen, but I'm withholding my excitement that way. And Zibanejad is fantastic for the Rangers right now. When you look at, I'm just going to take a quick look here at Ottawa, just as a for instance. I've discussed Ottawa a few times, and you look at Stone, Hoffman, and Brassard are your top scoring forwards. Brassard's got 17 points in 28 games at the time I'm doing this, and Duchesne's beneath them. Duchesne's beneath Stone by a lot. And I think when you look at 14 goals, 11 assists, 25 points in 28 games for Stone, that's roughly the kind of points that you'd be expecting from Duchesne at this point. That's the kind of scoring pace you'd expect from him. And he's not performing at that level. When Dorion made this trade, at the time, I was vocal about how I felt Nashville won the deal because they got Turris, who I felt was at least as good as Duchesne. Offensively, at least as good as Duchesne. And that Colorado had won in terms of picking up futures. Remember, from Nashville, they picked up a second-round draft pick, and they picked up Kamenev, and they also picked up Girard. I mean, they made off with seven assets and gave up 1. And Ottawa gave up 1 to get 1, and then they gave up the other 4 to make the deal go through. It's a ridiculous trade. Kyle Turris, first, third, Bowers for Duchesne. Hammond is just a throw in because he's an expensive contract Ottawa wanted to get rid of. It is a ridiculous trade. And it's one that has potential ramifications on this franchise going forward. A franchise which is not shy about trading away draft picks. And this is an argument that I've had, and I'm going to kind of close it off here because there isn't a whole lot else I can add. I am telling you people, this started before he took over. Before Dorion took over, this was already looking like a black hole in losing Spezza and Foligno and not getting a lot back offensively for them. If this was a team that was filled with offense and there was tons of it to go around, I could understand giving up Zibanejad, Spezza, and Foligno and getting back a Mathot that's now in Vegas, a Chason that's now in Washington, prospects that aren't on the lineup. Nick Paul's played 4 games, and you've got a Brassard back. And Brassard's decent, not Zibanejad. I guarantee you there's no Rangers fan in the world that undoes that trade. Says, oh yeah, we give you a second in Zibanejad for Brassard and a 7th. At the time that trade went down, it looked lopsided. But at the same time, I have this discussion with people all the time where they'll say, well, we can get so-and-so, and all we have to do is give up draft picks. Just draft picks, it's fine. But every year is different, and when you start trading out draft picks, it can come back to haunt you. It haunted the Canucks. There was the one year there that, it was every year that Nonis was in Vancouver. He just traded out all the draft picks. Second, third rounders, trade them. And it absolutely crippled the Canucks farm system. It crippled their prospects lists. Everybody, there's a lot of talk about certain teams don't draft well. A lot of the times when you talk about a team that doesn't draft well, if you look, that's because they trade away draft picks. They probably don't have the volume of draft picks so that they can have 2 or 3 misses because they're guaranteed to have more hits just through the fact they have more draft picks. This is why Vegas is flipping brilliant. Vegas has, I think at last time I checked, 11 draft picks in this upcoming draft. And they have a protected draft pick early on in the first round, no matter how well the team does. This is a crazy, crazy year for Vegas. They're playing great. They got tons of draft picks coming up in 2018 after they had a ton in 2017. Meanwhile, Ottawa sheds a bunch of draft picks, sheds young players, and doesn't have draft picks in this upcoming draft to help offset what they've lost. This is why an expansion team in Vegas is worth $500 million and Ottawa is not. The mismanagement didn't start with Pierre Dorion, but it didn't get better with Pierre Dorion. This team has been trying to win now since, 12-13, when they decided Bishop could go. We're going to win now. Well, it's now. And at the time I'm recording this, they got 9 wins. And they've played 28 games. It's not good enough. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. And again, I'm trying to find moves where I think Ottawa really won. And I think Condon was a win. You could argue Brown, I guess, on some level. Maybe. And then from there, they're either losses or they're saw-offs. Let me know what you guys think, and I'll talk to you again soon.